Hello, and welcome to the ACM's third learning webinar. This webinar reflects ACM's deep commitment to lifelong learning. Our aim is to empower computing professionals and students who join ACM's worldwide community of 100,000 plus members. My name is Ankur Teredesai, and I'm an Associate Professor of Computer Science and Systems at the Institute of Technology, University of Washington-Tacoma, and the Information Director of ACM Special Interest Group in Knowledge Discovery and Data Mining, SIGKDD. I'll be serving as your moderator for today's webinar. A little bit about ACM. ACM offers innovative educational and professional development resources that bolster the skills and enhance career development opportunities for its members. Our members are able to stay competitive in a dynamic computing world with a range of ACM Learning Center online resources, and you can find them at learning.acm.org. You can see some of the highlights of these activities and opportunities on your screen today. ACM recognizes the role of computing in driving the innovations that sustain competitiveness in a global environment. Together with timely computing information published by the ACM, access to the ACM Digital Library, the world's most comprehensive database of computing literature, and many international conferences that draw leading experts from a broad spectrum of computing topics. ACM enables its members to solve critical problems using new technology that enriches our lives and advances our society in the digital age. Within the ACM, the Special Interest Group on Knowledge Discovery and Data Mining, SIGKDD, is the premier forum with over 2,000 members from leading research institutions, universities, and business organizations in more than 80 countries. SIGKDD advances the adoption of KDD, that is knowledge discovery in data mining, and various fields such as data science over big data. SIGKDD's mission is to provide the growing community of data analytics experts with the right tools and resources to promote the value of knowledge discovery in today's data-centric economy. I invite you to explore more at kdd.org. So before today's presentation is 2012 Big Data, End of the World or End of BI? And our presenter will be Barry Devlin of Ninesight Consulting. Before we launch into today's topic, I would like to highlight some of the housekeeping items here for everyone's convenience. At the end of our presentation, we will have time for questions and answers from the invited speaker, and I hope that all of you participate by submitting questions, and we will, provide an opportunity at the end to have that discussion. At the top right corner, there is also a green button that allows you to enlarge the slides. So you may enlarge the slides at any time by dragging the corner of the slide window, and the slides will automatically advance throughout the event, so you do not need to do anything to move the slides ahead. You can minimize the slide area, the Q&A, and the bio screens using the buttons on the bottom panel. If you are experiencing any problems with the program, please press the F5 key on your keyboard to refresh your console or close and relaunch the presentation. You can also visit the webcast help guide by clicking the Help widget on the slide window. Kindly disable any pop-up blocking software so that you can receive and respond to the feedback form at the end of this presentation. To control your volume, adjust the master volume on your computer, etc. This session is being recorded and will be archived. It will be available for review within about 48 hours at the learning.acm.org/webinar/BI website. If you think of a question during the presentation, please type it into the Q&A box on the lower left of the presentation screen and click on the submit button. Once you submit the question, we will get it in our panel and will appropriately put it in the queue for the answer. You do not need to wait until the end of the presentation to begin submitting your questions. And now, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Barry, we are honored to have presenting today Dr. Barry Devlin. Dr. Devlin is a founder of the data warehousing industry and among the foremost authorities worldwide on business intelligence and beyond. He is a widely respected consultant, lecturer, and author of the popular book Data Warehouse: From Architecture to Implementation. Dr. Devlin has over 30 years of experience in the IT industry, previously with IBM as an architect, consultant, manager, and software evangelist. As founder and principal of Ninesight Consulting, which you can find at ninesight.com, Barry provides strategic consulting and thought leadership to buyers and vendors of BI solutions. He is currently developing a new architectural model for fully consistent business support, from informational to operational and subsequently collaborative business integrated insight, which he terms as BI Square. Based out of Cape Town, South Africa, Barry's knowledge and expertise are in demand both locally and internationally. Barry, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation here today.
Thank you, Ankur. It is a pleasure to be here with you all. Good morning, good afternoon. It's good evening here from Cape Town, a wonderful, beautiful winter's evening here in Cape Town. And as Ankur has said already, the title of this topic is 2012, Big Data, the End of the World, or the End of BI. And some of you may recognize the graphic at the top right of this slide. The graphic is a representation of a Mayan calendar stone, and it is the basis for a number of predictions that some of you may have heard that the world will end in 2012. In fact, to be more precise, the predictions suggest that the world is going to end on the 21st of December. That's the Winter Solstice in the Northern Hemisphere of this year. And to be even more precise, it should end at sunset in the Yucatan Peninsula on that date. So if you are in any way superstitious, that's the time to think about. What I would like to do is to take us through a little bit of this thought, is the world ending? Because even if you're not superstitious, you probably come across quite a lot of information and quite a lot of thought around this whole area of the world ending in 2012. The idea here, as I think you've seen, is there is a very interesting movie came out last year. I don't know how many of you have seen it, where essentially the world ended. If you haven't seen the movie, I suggest you look at the trailer, which is available widely on the internet, because in many ways it's actually better than the movie. But you probably noticed that it's not only the Hollywood idea that the world is ending. There's a lot of stuff going on. There is the Arab Spring. There is the ecological crisis. There is climate change. There is even indeed the possible breakdown of the euro. The last couple of years have been very traumatic for many people, and in a way we are looking at very great change. So the question might arise, are we going to be looking at great change in BI as well? Before we just look at them today, I'd like to just take us back a few years to the original data warehouse architecture, which was produced by myself and a colleague called Paul Murphy in 1988. This particular architecture showed that there was a number of different components in the data warehouse. It was based on internal work that we did in IBM Europe back in the mid-'80s, and proposed a single logical storehouse for all information. It also proposed that that storehouse should be in the relational database environment because that was the in thing, the new thing at the time. And it's important to remember, of course, that we're always looking at what's going on in the technology scene in order to understand what's best to use at any particular time. So in this particular warehouse architecture, we were looking at a single logical storehouse. But as we moved forward and as we started to implement it, it became relatively clear quickly enough that such a single logical storehouse could not be easily created in the physical hardware of the time. And very quickly, it split into two layers, an enterprise data warehouse and data marts. And this is essentially the architecture basis that we have used since the early 90s. I'm sure it's very familiar to all of you who are involved in business intelligence and data warehousing. The characteristics are there are vertical and horizontal segmentation of information. This layering between operational systems, data warehouse, enterprise data warehouse, and data marts being particularly appropriate for creating a single view, a consistent view of information that was seen as very important in the day. It had separated out metadata to describe that information, and it was optimized for what I call hard data, that is to say data that fits pretty well into rows and columns and similar structures within like a relational database or spreadsheets. This architecture, as I said, has been the architecture of choice since the early 90s. But I want to actually ask you a couple of questions about that. Because underneath that architecture, there are four ancient postulates, which I discovered or which I wrote about back in 2009. These postulates, as in ideas which people have that they don't really think too much about and accept as givens, have been around for a long time. The first one since the 70s. And the question I want to pose to you is, are those postulates still correct? Those postulates are... Sorry, the screen's jumping around a bit at the moment. So let me just go back to those postulates. The first question that I wanted to pose to you is, do you really believe that operational and informational environments should be separated for both business and technical reasons? That was the belief both from a business and technical viewpoint back in the 1970s. Is it still true? I would suggest to you that operational BI and real-time data warehousing suggest differently. Postulate 2 said that a data warehouse is the only way to obtain a dependable, integrated view of the business. I would suggest to you that today ERP systems show us differently. Postulate 3 said that data warehouse was the only possible instantiation of a full enterprise data model. And again, I would suggest to you that ERP systems also show us that that's not necessarily so. And finally, the fourth postulate, a layered data warehouse being necessary for speedy and reliable query performance, actually we see very interesting results in things like analytical databases that suggest to us that perhaps that postulate also is not true any longer. And in fact, as we look at what has happened since the 1990s and onwards, we've seen an explosion of components that simply say to us, we are not anymore so well architected. Changing business needs have led to the addition of components like operational data stores, data staging areas, any number and types of data marts, independent or dependent, bidirectional data flows, federated virtual access, you name it, we've got it. Is this an architecture or is it a bowl of spaghetti? So we again need to go back and think about architecture, and that's something that I've been thinking about for the past few years. And I came up with what I believe are a more modern set of postulates, which really are about supporting a highly evolved business. So I not going to read them all in great detail for you. You can read them yourself, but just think about some of these thoughts, some of these ideas, because when we think about these ideas, we're looking at something very different. Modern business processors need to seamlessly combine action taking and decision making. That's a very important point. We no longer have this luxury to go away into our back offices, sit in front of our Cognos or our business object screens and ponder for hours. We need actual seamlessly combined action taking and decision making. And in order to do that, we must have an integrated continuum of consistent information, which, as point 2 says, must be based on a comprehensive enterprise information model. Now, that enterprise information model actually has to span many more types of information than we had back in the old days. In the old days, we just had traditional business information coming from our operational systems, our systems of record. Today, we have big data, we have real-time data, we have data coming from sensors. We have so much data that we don't know what to do with it. But it all must be somehow created and brought together in an enterprise information model. We need an information resource that is, in a way, best maintained as a single copy of each data item. Now, yes, I know that's not necessarily possible because sometimes we do need to make multiple copies. But we need to move away from the thinking today, which says, whenever I need to do something new, I'll make a new copy of the data. This is a recipe for disaster in terms of data management, and we need to get away from it and get back to something much more towards the view of a single copy of each type of data. And if we're to have an integrated action-taking, decision-making regime, we need to have an integrated model-based closed-loop process environment. We have to understand that both decision-making and action-taking are process-oriented and that they need to be brought together in the end user's view of a process and activities. And finally, we need to take account of how do users see this particular, this entire environment. It needs to be an integrated, flexible, and role-based view. What that led me to way back in 2009 was an architecture which I call Business Integrated Insight, or BI to the power of 2. And yes, it is layered, but the layering is information, process, and people. Information, all of the information in a business information resource, all of the process, and I mean both IT and business user process in the business function assembly, and a personal action domain which represents the way that people think. This is a big step. This is a big change from the way of thinking about business intelligence. It actually is a new architecture for the enterprise, a new architecture for IT, which spans the entire enterprise. So that's been my thinking for the past couple of years. So coming to 2012, the question is, well, what now? What do we need to think about now? What has changed? Is there a shark hidden in the waters behind us that we need to take care of? Well, first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about a view of business and technology, which I call the biz-tech ecosystem first. And then I want to talk about 3 sort of architectural pictures that I will show you that I think, well, assuming that we are going to survive 2012, that you need to think about next year. So let's have a look next at the biz-tech ecosystem. What do I mean by the biz-tech ecosystem? Well, you've probably heard from various analysts and gurus that IT is dead. Whether it's outsourcing, whether it's moving to the cloud, whether it's the commoditization of IT systems, that those of you who work in IT, and I guess that's probably most of you, are about to lose your jobs. Well, the good news for me is I don't think that's true. I actually think that we are moving towards a fully symbiotic existence of business and IT. What I mean by that is that we will see that the business and the IT sides of this equation need to work together, closely, need to work together in such a way that one cross-fertilizes the other. We need to think about these three characteristics of interdependence, reintegration, and crossover. When you start looking at the things that technology enables business to do today, we have to understand that there is an interdependence going on here. New technology is enabling new business possibilities, but new business opportunities drive technology advances. And this works in a tight loop together so that when we start thinking about what the business needs, we can then immediately see that technology could drive it, but we could also see that the technology, as we start using it, gives us new business possibilities. Interdependence. Secondly, reintegration. If we want to have, and we must have, this symbiotic existence, we need to recognize that the silos that exist today between our business functions, the silos that exist between business and IT, the silos that exist in IT become obvious to the customers who are using our web sites. And they drive our customers mad. So it becomes mandatory that we need to move to a coherent, reintegrated view of our businesses. And finally, we need to see crossover. By that I mean business people needing IT skills to see how to recreate the business with new technology. I don't say that business people need to be IT experts, but they do need to have some IT skills to see what's possible. And IT people needing business acumen to see how to satisfy business needs in new ways with emerging technology. What we could see in this then is the emergence of a crossover, an existence between, a symbiotic existence between business and IT. And what I'd like to do is to give you the opportunity now, because I don't want you sleeping, to answer this question. How well aligned are your IT and business departments? You know, it's common thinking that, you know, business and IT are at war. But in fact, it may well be that, you know, you actually work closely together. Maybe you cooperate occasionally. Maybe you're in an uneasy truce. But I'd be interested to know what your view is. How far is it that you are able to get these things together? And as I'm watching these results coming in, I'm seeing that actually, at least among the audience here, there's quite a preponderance of people who are working closely in organizations where IT and business are working closely together, which is very interesting. It's actually a myth, it seems, at least in this audience, that that there is a particular difficulty between business and IT. And that's really encouraging for me, because I come from more an IT background than a business background, but most of my work is on the fence between business and IT. And it's good to see that, at least among you folks, that there is a strong feeling that there's a good alignment between the departments. So let's move on to thinking about this. The idea really is that we need to move from this thinking, and I think you guys have, that there is a question here of beauty and the beast. In fact, business and IT no longer are Beauty and the Beast, and those of you who are familiar with the old fairy tales remember that Beast was actually a prince, and I leave you in the audience to decide among yourselves on which side of that table you sit, on the beauty side or the beast. Let's just talk a little bit more about this biz-tech ecosystem. I want to show you a couple examples of what it means. And the first one that I want to show you is actually quite an old one. It dates back to the early 1990s, and it is in the retail environment. You may recall that back in the 90s, people, big retailers like Walmart as a particular example, began to use till scanning systems, taking the data from them, bringing those into that data into their data warehouses and using it to begin to manage their supply chain to the warehouse and then actually all the way back to the manufacturer. Now, this is a well-known example of business intelligence, operational business intelligence being used, and it has been very successful. It's been a key part of Walmart's success, for example, in the last 20 years. But the point I think that maybe we don't recognize so much is that business intelligence application and that use of BI actually reinvented retail. Before that, retail behaved very differently indeed. Retail was a much more undemanding environment. Now it works in real time all the way from manufacturer to the shop floor and beyond in terms of predicting customers' behaviors and what comes next. So that's maybe an older example. Let's move forward to a couple of years and look at something slightly different. Let's look at the internet. The web has really recreated the way that we do research and recording of reality. The web has recreated the library in many ways. If I go back to when I started work, we would go down to a physical library and start looking things up. If I go back even further, I remember my father going out and buying Encyclopedia Britannica in order that we would have in the house a set of information about the world and what it was. Today, of course, well, I just heard recently, and it's a little bit sad, that Encyclopedia Britannica is no longer published in physical form. You cannot buy those books anymore. It's all on Wikipedia. And there are over 20 million articles on the English version of Wikipedia these days. Of course, we're trading off something here. We're trading off the cost of authority against democracy. So you may not be quite so sure about some of the answers you get on Wikipedia. You would have been more sure in the case of Encyclopedia Britannica. The questions arise now: who vouches for truth? How do we know that something is actually so? And as a writer and as a presenter, of course, huge issues around copyright and intellectual property. But the interesting thing here on the picture on the bottom right of this slide reminds us that this is not new. Actually, as far back as 1945, a gentleman by the name of Vannevar Bush coined the phrase Memex. And it was a device which is illustrated in this picture, which was a view of a mechanized device where individuals would compress and store all of their books and records so that they mechanized so that they might be consulted with exceeding speed and flexibility, and that it would provide an enlarged, intimate supplement to one's memory. The concept actually influenced the development of early hypertext systems, but you can see that, in physical terms, it probably never could have worked, but in fact it was the predecessor of the web. And let's move forward even further to something closer to what's going on at the moment, and that's big data. Big data is one of the key phrases at the moment. It's one of the interesting things that everybody wants to talk about. And I'm just going to choose one piece of it. I'm not going to talk about the hype there is about measuring social networking effects and who influences whom and all the rest of it that marketing people love to talk about. There's actually something very interesting, much more interesting going on in other areas. Big data includes, as some of you may know, a lot of sensor data and an increasing amount of sensor data coming from various devices on the internet. Today, our cars, our airplanes, even our fridges have microprocessors and sensors in them. And those sensors are being increasingly connected to the internet and put to use, the data coming from them for various different purposes. And if you look at this slide, what it's saying is that big data enables the redefinition of the processes and the approach to automobile insurance. The concept of pay as you drive. So as you're driving around, your motor car is basically Big Brother reporting on you. Are you braking hard? Are you swerving around corners? Do you speed up quickly? Do you slow down quickly? Do you crash? All of that can be fed back increasingly to insurance companies, which enables them to then say, hey, you're a good driver or you're a bad driver. This is not what insurance used to be about. Insurance used to be about spreading risk. It used to be about allowing people, some level of freedom perhaps, but also spreading the risk of particular calamities. Now, insurance can be, and at least in this area, driven to avoid risk. This is a completely different way of doing insurance business, and it's being driven by biz-tech ecosystem. So it's very important as we go forward to understand how this changes. And big data is a key part of that. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about what your organization is doing about big data. Are you in production? Are you experimenting or a proof of concept? Are you exploring options? Are you planning to investigate? Or do you have no business need? And this actually is, I just put it to you, there's myself and a colleague, Sean Rogers of Enterprise Management Associates, are actually going to be going out with a much broader survey in this area over the next few weeks. And if you'd like us to put you on or put you in touch with this survey, drop me an email. You have my contact details on the slides, barry@9site.com, and I'll happily make sure that you get the opportunity to participate in that more complete survey. So let me see what's going on at the moment. We have quite a spread going on here, quite a spread of votes, and these seem to be pretty much finished at this stage. Let's put them out to the audience. I'm seeing actually a very interesting spread here. There's all over the place. We are some people in production, similar number saying, hey, a similar number saying, hey, you know what, we've got no business need. And in between, quite a proportion of you experimenting, exploring, planning to investigate. But only about 14-15% of the audience actually in production at this stage. Okay, so let's move forward. We have now this idea of the biz-tech ecosystem. We have this idea of big data and its importance and how we can play to it. Let me move on and show you the idea of what we should do next. 3 new architectural pictures for 2013. So first of all, what should you be doing in business intelligence? I would say to you that the first thing in 2013, and indeed for the rest of this year, is that you need to remove or reduce the layering in your informational system. I believe that the picture I showed you earlier, bi to the power of 2, is still a valid picture. But this idea of removing layers, reducing layers within the informational systems is a first step. That first step, I believe, will look something like this. I'm calling it an advanced information warehouse. You can call it whatever you like. But here are the sort of characteristics that I think you're going to see. The first thing is that that we will move to pillars rather than layers. That is to say that not all of the data needs to go through an enterprise data warehouse system like it did in the past. We need to start thinking about the fact that in order to have more responsiveness, we can route data through parallel systems. In this, I'm showing some possible parallel systems. But in the middle is something I call core business data. That core business data is essentially the evolution of the EDW today. It is the place where we put the information that needs to be correct, that needs to be in good shape for the business as a whole. But around it we have other things, and I'm showing just samples of what they might be. You might have a particular environment which is optimized for historical reporting data or for operational analysis data. And you could imagine, as you look at the technology characteristics of those 3 different pillars, that they would be quite different. The core business data you would probably think about as being in a much more traditional relational environment, whereas the operation and analysis data, or indeed the historical reporting data, we might put into the more modern analytics environment, which have faster querying, larger volumes, and so on and so forth. We might have a pillar of multi-structured data. This is the Hadoops and the NoSQL databases for particular types of applications or needs. We might have streaming event data which actually never lands on disks, but is actually queried and managed within the environment. So we have these pillars, and they are described by metadata. They are linked across and share information. We have a data population environment, which is probably much like our ETL today. But on the top is something which in the past we in data warehousing and business intelligence have been very reluctant to embrace, called data virtualization. The ability to, on the fly, create queries across these different data stores, across these different pillars. And that becomes a very important component, I believe, of data warehousing as we go forward. Because if you are really aware of what's going on here, you cannot begin to imagine that all of the data is going to be in one environment. There will be relational databases, there will be non-relational databases, there will be content stores, there will be stuff on your desk in spreadsheets that you want to combine together to get the results. And that means having a data virtualization component linked in with metadata, brought together with the ability to understand the context of each of those things so that we fit together as a working environment, a combined working environment. I call this advanced information warehousing, and I believe it's a key step that all significant data warehouse or business intelligence and implementations need to start thinking about over the next year or two, and perhaps even the next month or two if you're feeling particularly ambitious. So that's number one. Number two is dealing with these new information types, and we've talked about this a little bit already. Let's go a little bit deeper. You know, big data is talked about today in terms of volumes, velocity, and variety, and they're good words. There's nothing wrong with them, but big data actually challenges our fundamental beliefs about the relationship between data and knowledge. And this is going to be a key part of the book that I'm writing, because when you start thinking about these things, we have some very interesting beliefs about how we get from data to knowledge. In fact, the idea, the concept which we've had perhaps for 20 years now is a pyramid of data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, sometimes called DIKW, which essentially says things like data begets information, and information becomes knowledge, and knowledge begets wisdom. And there's this sort of thought that we percolate through these layers from the bottom of this pyramid up. Well, I think we're going to open Pandora's box here. We are going to open Pandora's box and think about, is this really true? How do data and information relate? Where does knowledge and wisdom fit? And what about meaning? What about meaning? You know, when Pandora opened the box back in Hesiod's tale, all of the ills of the word flew out, and the only thing that remained in the box at the end was hope. And what I'd like to give you on the next slide is perhaps hope. I want to show you something that I call the modern meaning model, or M3. Playing around with this thought of information, knowledge, and meaning. And I'm just going to give you some very brief thoughts around this. First of all, data and information. Data is not something that is turned into information. Data is a subset of information. Data is what I call hard information, content, soft information. Data is over at the formal structured side of information and really corresponds to the ancient practice of counting. And as we've moved beyond counting into writing and indeed imagining and imaging stuff, we move into softer information and content. And information is simply, and data underneath it, within it, is simply stored signs and symbols to describe and communicate about the world and our thoughts. And in that sense is as close to the physical, objective, universal description as we can get of reality. Knowledge, on the other hand, is the total of our experience, values, understanding, and insight. And you'll often see it split into explicit and tacit knowledge. Well, those things that's all very well, but it doesn't actually necessarily have to be extracted from information. And finally, coming to meaning, the interpretations that people put on reality, the stories that we tell ourselves about what happened, about what can happen, are very subjective and personal, very conceptual, and they differ from person to person. And it's in that difference that we have innovation. It's in that difference that we have the ability to move from, from I don't know what's going on to, here's what I can do about it. And as I move to the third piece of this puzzle, you will see that what I'm saying is that, you know what, not all of our decisions are entirely rational. In fact, many of our decisions are based on other stuff, and we post-justify them based on rationality. So, collaboration is always part of decision-making in the business decision-making environment. And I just want to play a little bit with this idea here with you before we finish up this presentation. I believe that as we look at the idea of how we will make decisions over the coming years, key to this will be the fact that they, A, are not rational, and B, that they will be collaborative. And in fact, millennials, those people who have come of age around the millennium and are beginning to move into leadership roles in business today, team play is core practice. Not only that, but they are used to working together in an electronically mediated environment with social networking, with cell phones, with all of the tools that the older folks among us came to in midlife. This is really important. This is the way things are changing and will change. Let me explain it to you. The idea here is if I look at decision-making today, and as we've done it in business intelligence so far, decision-making is a solitary game. Traditional BI focused on investigation. It was mostly driven by a single individual, and then the insights were reviewed at the end. The tools that we had and the way that we worked is we gathered formal information around a challenge, we integrated it, we put some intuition and intention on it, but we interpreted it alone. Then we went and got some peer review. And formal information, mostly hard data, mostly relational stuff, was actually the key driver in that environment. And as we move forward, thinking about collaboration, we have the possibility to drive change. Collaborative BI shows an increasing recognition that all organizations are social networks, that social interactions and behaviors really drive lasting innovation, that technology is now advanced enough to support those social interactions and link them to traditional business functions, and that the current and future employees that are coming into our business and becoming managers actually expect internet norms of connectivity and networking to carry them into work life. And I would argue that when we look at collaborative BI tooling, that really doesn't do that. So our final poll question for this session is, how is your BI department implementing collaborative tooling? Is it as part of an enterprise-wide initiative? Is it using what your current BI tools offer? Are you planning to investigate, or are you doing nothing? The idea here is that I would like you to think beyond what it is that the current tools offer. I'd like you to think about how far you can go in terms of collaboration with these tools, or do you want to really look at it in a broader sense? I'm just watching I'm watching the results come in. For a moment there, I was getting a bit of a shock because the early winners were doing nothing. But now it's beginning that there are people who've thought about it are actually beginning to do various different approaches. Let me refresh one more time here, and then I'll push you the results so you can see what you folks have been saying. Another nice mix. I see at least a quarter of you doing collaborative tooling as part of an enterprise-wide initiative. And I think that is really encouraging because that is so important. I'm very conscious that time is moving on here, and I've got a couple more slides to go through before we get to Q&A. So let me move on quickly. Okay, so mobile computing is a key part of collaboration, not because people are in constant motion, although that is true, not because it supports meetings on and off site, not indeed even because it performs an excellent form factor for information dissemination. What actually is important about it is that it provides a major source of data, and it provides a major source of tracking and recording interactions, what I call informal information about what's going on. So in other words, the key component that we've been missing in terms of collaboration so far, the ability to know what's going on informally between the participants, is being supported by this new technology. And so we get the idea that I call this the eyesight model of team-based decision-making, where we have the decisions being driven by interaction between people, and the informal information, the communication that goes on between people, the meetings that happen online, the phone calls, the text messages, the online conferences, that they are digitally recorded in order to provide the basis of the decision-making, the improvisation, the imagination that happens. You know, when we do it face-to-face and you step up to the whiteboard and you start drawing boxes, you begin to see how decision-making is driven by interaction. And we have the possibility to move that online as we go forward. So what that means is that we can create, if you like, a new architecture here. This is about an architecture that I've just played with words here, about an information orchestrator, an interaction choreographer, and a personal innovation platform. I point you to a white paper on my website which talks about that in more depth. Let me wrap up. So there are three conclusions that I'd like to give you, if I could, that if 2012 is not the end, then surely it could be a beginning. And if it is a beginning, one of the first things you need to do is to simplify the BI environment. Less layers, less copies, less ETL, and recognize the emerging role of the IT folks and the business folks together. Do look at big data. Perhaps forget about the hype, but evaluate it, because there are opportunities in unexpected places. And enable innovation through team working. This is collaborative decisioning versus collaborative BI. And the emerging role of informal information is something that you need to think about. And so with that, what I'd like to say to you is thank you. I hope that you found that the information that I've been giving you and has given you some food for thought as you've moved forward and as you look at what to do next. And I'd like to also just put it to you that there may have been some other reason other than the actual counting that meant that 2012 was the end of the Mayan calendar. With that, thank you very much. I'd like to hand back to Ankur.
Thank you, Barry. That was a wonderful overview presentation with several very interesting ideas, and we have some very exciting and interesting questions lined up. Let me start off with a very interesting question from Anton. And Anton's question is, what are the drivers and main trends in collaborative decision making? How does, for example, crowdsourcing and AI and machine learning play a role in this decision making? Perhaps you could address it for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I'm seeing that there are so many questions here that we're never going to get through all of them, but let's see what we can do. I'll try and be brief. Collaborative decision making, I think, in my view, is something that we need to step back from the crowdsourcing, the external view of collaboration and social media and all of that stuff that's going on, and try to understand it. How do people work together? And when we start thinking about how people work together, we will see that they work in teams, and how they work together in teams is that they talk to one another, they interact with one another, they listen to one another, and they cross-fertilize one another's ideas. We need to get that particular process into the technology, into the collaborative decision-making software. So I think that's the key point.
Thank you, Barry. If you could go back to slide 21, there was a lot of interest around that slide during the presentation, and one of the questions that point to sort of the distributed enterprise data warehouse architecture or the new architecture that you are proposing. The question here is, what happens when there is data that falls under multiple verticals? For example, streaming data, which requires main memory processing, and enterprise warehouse data, which might be more historical in nature, but at the same time maybe a very high velocity data set. So could you address that a little bit?
Yeah, one of the things about data warehousing, whether it was in the 1980s or the 2010s, is that there are always multiple uses of the same data, and we have to start taking that into account. Our current way of modeling, and indeed our current tools, do not easily support us taking that different view. So we have to recognize that the fact that what is apparently the same data used for different purposes is to some extent different data. It is to some extent because of the purpose that it's used for, and the combination in which it's used with other things makes it a different component or a different entity in some data modeling sense. And this requires us to look, I believe, at a more generic way of doing data modeling. It requires us to look at the possibility that some pieces of data, let's say, that are in the core business data and that need to be kept for a long period of time, and they are what we depend upon, if you like, get simplistically copied into the historical or the operation and analytics area, and they may change there. But it is necessary within our environment, within our models and our metadata, to recognize those things as, although they're the same source, different data. It's not an easy question to answer. It's not an easy technical decision, but it requires us to be very flexible in how we do that.
Interesting. So Joe Hellerstein, one of the prominent database researchers, recently claimed that we will soon enter a world of two database systems, if not three database systems, where every problem will require a combination of main memory and relational, or relational and columnar, or columnar and main memory databases together. And it seems or appears that the solution you are proposing is also very similar along those lines. One of the questions in the session today from John Wilson is, could you describe the role that the enterprise data warehouse or the big data warehouse, a distributed big data warehouse, will play with respect to GIS data or cartography data or spatial data? And if you have any thoughts around how these many multiple database systems might struggle or provide other opportunities for these types of data sets.
Oh, yeah. I agree with the first comment that you made, Ankur, around the need for different technologies, data residing in different technologies, to be combined as part of solutions and part of answers to particular problems. I think the day is gone where we have this concept of a single version of the truth, for example, and I mean that both in terms of the different technologies that we need to store different types of data, but also in terms of the business side of it, which I believe increasingly is seeing the fact that yes, there is some set of data which does need to be a single version of the truth, because if it's not, my CEO will go to jail, but there is a lot of other data where there will be multiple versions of the truth, because there are multiple truths for different departments and different people. The question is how to make sure that they fit together. So in terms of the architectural view, what I see is that there will be indeed, going forward, relational databases, there will be streaming data, there will be different flavors of relational databases, even where we focus optimize one for speed and another for consistency. There will be Hadoops, there will be content stores, and that we have the ability through data virtualization tools to spread our queries over them. This is, it's a big step, because in the past we thought, and it was right at the time, that we couldn't manage those type of virtual queries in real time, because our systems, our data was not clean enough, our systems, our networks weren't fast enough, and so on and so forth. Today, I think some of those problems still exist, but it is certainly much more possible to think about virtualized access to different sources as we go forward. So with that, we can envisage that there will be multiple systems. Indeed, some of them will be in memory, some of them will be on disk, some of them will be on the network, I'm quite sure. And I believe that there is significant amounts of research work going on in that area.
So we have time for one more question, and it's an overarching question, so I'll pose it as broadly as possible. We've talked about big data, we've talked about architectures for big data. Do you think that we need to rethink the security model for big data? How does that tie in with government policies and private enterprise policies around cyber security and infrastructure across continents, across countries? Does that whole model need to be changed, rethought? Any opinions, Barry?
I'd like to expand it just a little bit and say it's not just about security. I believe it's about privacy as well. I think we do need a new model here. I think we've been very lax in terms of how we manage data and how we manage information. And I think big data is both a power for good and an immense power for evil. We need, as BI people, as information management experts, to start thinking about this. I don't know what the answer is, to be absolutely honest. But I am quite sure that if we do not start looking at this carefully, looking at the security, looking at the privacy implications, looking at the distribution implications of big data, very soon we are going to have a significant exposure, a significant leak, which will really set people's teeth on edge. And we stand to lose a lot of the possible gains. Today, I think a lot of the focus in big data is on mining social data, which essentially I think we're now capable of identifying individuals, even though we think we've got anonymized data. And when we're capable of identifying individuals in big data, I think we are on the verge of destroying privacy as we knew it. And I know I'm on a soapbox here, but I'm just going to finish. I think we're on the verge of destroying that privacy. And I really do believe that we in the IT industry and BI industry and the ACM do really need to look at what we're doing in this field, because with Facebook, with Twitter, with all of the information that's out there, I think we are opening ourselves up to all sorts of abuse. And big data as an overarching concept could be used for much better purposes than figuring out who's influencing whom to watch what television program.
Thank you, Barry. But let's leave the webinar on a positive note where the opportunities for improving the societal impact from big data is tremendous. Well, we've run out of time today, Barry, and I would like to thank Barry for presenting at this webinar today. Thank you, Barry, again. I'd like to thank the audience for the flood of questions that we received during the presentation. I would like to remind everyone that this webinar will be available on demand at learning.acm.org/webinar/bi. Please don't forget to check out ACM's other learning resources in the area of business intelligence, data management, and beyond. Please do also check out the Special Interest Group in Knowledge Discovery and Data Mining, SIGKDD. In closing, once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Devlin for his informative presentation and insightful answers to the many questions. A special thanks to the audience for taking time to attend and participate. This is Ankur Teredesai saying, hope you can join us next time. And if you have other ideas for future topics or speakers, please email them to learning@acm.org.